This is Al Jazeera.
Hello, I'm Mariam Namazi. You're watching the NewsHour live from London, coming up in the next 60 minutes. China's government struggles to contain a wave of anger after a doctor who raised the alarm about the coronavirus dies in hospital.
Global stocks of masks and respirators are now insufficient to meet the needs of WHO.
This as the World Health Organization says soaring demand for masks is disrupting the fight to stop the epidemic. Also coming up this hour, Turkey deploys troops and tanks to Syria's last rebel stronghold as pro-government forces close in. And we look at the national health crisis that's dominating the agenda ahead of Ireland's general election.
And I'm Peter Stemmet in Doha with all your sport. Tensions at the Nou Camp are heightened as Lionel Messi's Barcelona are knocked out of the cup amid a dispute between the players and the club.
Welcome to the programme. Our top story, China's government is battling to contain a wave of grief and anger after a doctor who was punished for raising the alarm about the coronavirus died in hospital. Hundreds of thousands of people have used social media to pay tribute to Dr. Li Wenliang, who reportedly fell ill after treating a patient. Many accuse Chinese officials of trying to stage a cover-up and putting politics above public safety. Government in Beijing is saying that it will investigate while also racing to contain the epidemic that so far killed more than 630 people on the Chinese mainland. 2 other deaths have also been reported in the Philippines and in Hong Kong. More than 31,000 people have been infected on mainland China, with at least 320 cases in 27 other countries and territories. The World Health Organization has been speaking out, saying that demand for masks, gowns and gloves have shot up by more than 100 times, causing a supply backlog of 4 to 6 months.
On Tuesday, we're sending testing kits, masks, gloves, respirators and gowns to countries in every region. However, the world is facing chronic shortage of personal protective equipment, as you might imagine. This afternoon, I will be speaking to the pandemic supply chain network to identify the bottlenecks and find solutions.
Meanwhile, in terms of measures the Chinese government is taking, it has sealed off cities, cancelled flights and closed factories to limit the spread of the virus in the world's most populous country. Al Jazeera's Adrian Brown now reports from Hong Kong.
These are some of the last poignant images of Li Wenliang, a doctor who was punished for daring to tell the truth. Now he's died from the virus that he'd first warned colleagues about late last year. To many, he'll be remembered as a Chinese hero.
I deeply regret his death and feel sincerely sad for him. We need to see if the influence of his death can wake up anything, and I hope he did not die in vain.
He left us when we needed him to fight the virus, and he was a victim of the virus too. He was unfairly criticized because of his work, so we feel very sad and regretful.
He showed a responsible attitude towards society. He is honest and faithful. So I think the whole society should reflect on this.
On social media, the grief and outrage is more profound. Is it that hard for the government to admit it's wrong? A doctor had to die twice. That's a national humiliation. And the eyes of the people are clear. His death is the top trending topic on China's microblogging site Weibo. One of the most popular hashtags before being deleted was, "We want freedom of speech." Li had been in the front line of this crisis, falling sick from the virus while treating patients. His death was confirmed on the website of Wuhan Hospital on Friday morning. Li died after all rescue efforts, said the statement. We express our deep condolence, as did an official from China's National Health Commission.
The National Health Commission extends our sincere condolences and respect to the family and wife of Dr. Li Wenliang. We know that for medical workers on the front line, they sacrificed their own family life to contribute to this battle against the virus. The society needs to care more about our medical workers.
In December, Li had sought to share information about his concerns, only to be investigated by police who accused him of spreading rumours. Li's passing highlights the huge risks taken by frontline doctors and nurses to treat patients, a situation made worse by overcrowded hospitals and an acute shortage of beds. The government appears to be listening. It's dispatched a team of anti-corruption investigators to Wuhan to, in its words, listen to the concerns of the public. And in China today, there's no shortage of people with opinions about the doctor and the way he was treated. The virus has spread across China, with cases also emerging in 24 countries. 2 cruise ships carrying thousands of holidaymakers have been placed under quarantine in Hong Kong and Japan as doctors test all on board for infection. And another ship currently in the South China Sea has been refused entry by Japan, South Korea and the Philippines. In China, the growing public outrage will worry the leadership as it threatens to create what they fear most, social unrest. Adrian Brown, Al Jazeera, Hong Kong.
Well, we're joined now by Alison Sherlock, a researcher for the Eurasia Group focusing on China. What is your assessment of how would you describe the public reaction inside China to the death of Dr. Li, particularly after he tried to sound the warning over the virus, but was then pressured and criticized for doing that?
Thank you for having me. The outpouring of grief and anger after Dr. Li's death has been really surprising and unusual in China. And I think the central government was really taken aback by this show of emotion online. And so now they're trying to catch up with the response by trying to turn him into a state-sanctioned hero by lauding his selflessness during the crisis and by sending out a team to Wuhan to investigate why he was silenced. And I wouldn't be surprised that if someone loses their job over this, I think the government is really trying to look like they're on the people's side here. The problem is that people are acutely aware of the hypocrisy of their statements because they know that even if the central government was not directly involved in the Wuhan officials silencing Dr. Li, they at least condoned those actions. And we've seen them continue to happen throughout the country. Just a few days ago in Yunnan province,
tell me, how has Dr. Li's... It's very unusual, as you say, for ordinary people who are not opponents of the government or activists to be speaking out in this way. But tell me more, first of all, about how Dr. Li's death has then changed the atmosphere. What specifically are people saying about this?
So there's a few things, but the most important is that people are trying to question why local officials would try to silence someone who is trying to share information with other professionals online about the virus. Now the document that the Public Security Bureau forced him to sign is circulating online where he was treated like a criminal who had broken the law. And people are upset that someone who was clearly working to save lives was treated in such a manner.
So you were saying that Chinese officials are trying to use Dr. Li's death to shape the narrative around the coronavirus. Tell us more about how they have portrayed him.
So we have seen some official media outlets even call him a whistleblower, acknowledging that there were some attempts to silence them, but they're trying to separate the central authorities from the local government in this case, and trying to show that the central government is, like I said before, on the side of the people. But these attempts are coming off rather tone deaf as people are remarking that, they know what happened to him and they are concerned that it's going to keep happening unless local officials and people at the center are really held accountable.
So you have this ongoing clampdown, this censorship. Already people are angry with the government for playing down the threat from the coronavirus. And then within Hubei province in the city of Wuhan, people are under lockdown. So there's a lot of outrage and alarm over that. If people perceive the government to be stifling openness and transparency, particularly in the wake of the death of Dr. Lee, how much more frustrated could they get, and how might they express that?
Well, I think there's a sort of a distinction between criticism of certain institutions like freedom of speech and the state as a whole versus criticism of the local officials. So I think that the censorship apparatus is going to allow more direct criticism of local officials. So it'll be possible that we'll see more calls to investigate local officials, and people will use official channels to try and report wrongdoing among local authorities. But beyond that, it's unclear whether the central government will allow for more substantial, organizing, or just because I think they're concerned that people might start to connect the dots between the local authorities and the center.
All right. Thank you very much, Alison Sherlock. Appreciate your thoughts on the story, joining us there from the Eurasia Group. Well, so that's the situation inside China, but of course the coronavirus has affected countries and territories beyond China's borders, and actually 3 cases of the virus have been reported in the Philippines. Medical staff there are striking against what they say are deteriorating working conditions. Jamel Alan-Dogan is in Manila and explains what they want.
We are outside one of the government hospitals here in Manila, where health workers are picketing, demanding better transparency from the Philippine government. They say they have been frustrated with the government's response towards this outbreak, and they're hoping for better compensation and better protection. Slashing of the national budget of many health research and monitoring facilities and services actually is worsening the situation. They hope, they say, that the government will react fast because time is of the essence. They also remain committed to their cause, and they will continue their work, but call on the government for more support, for better protection, compensation, and better equipment in many government facilities across the country.
Now, in our other top stories, Turkish armoured vehicles and tanks have entered Idlib province in northwestern Syria, the last rebel-held region there. It's in response to an advance by government forces and could pave the way for them to make an offensive on the province's capital. But as Sinem Kasioglu reports, Turkey is determined to stop that.
Syrian government forces in the suburbs of Sarakib, hours before the strategic town fell after fierce fighting with its Syrian rebel defenders. Sarakib sits at the junction of 2 major highways and was seen as a major obstacle in regaining control of Idlib province, 1/3 of which is now under Syrian government control. Turkey has warned pro-Damascus forces to back off.
Unfortunately, the Syrian regime does not believe in political process and thinks peace can only be possible by a military solution. And I have to say they are wrong about this. They have stepped up their aggression.
Turkey has 12 military observation posts positioned around Idlib de-escalation zone, agreed with Russia and Iran in 2017. But 9 of them have been surrounded by advancing Syrian government forces. To protect Sarakib and stop the advance, Turkey established 4 more posts, which ended up in direct clashes between the Turkish and Syrian armies.
Saldırılara meşru müdafaa kapsamında misliyle karşılık verilmiştir.
The attacks were responded to within the scope of self-defense. From now on, any kind of attack will be responded to appropriately, and our observation posts will continue their duties.
The Syrian government has intensified its attacks since last November and, backed by Russia, has targeted civilians. This triggered a new wave of migration, with hundreds of thousands of people fleeing the violence.
In the 9-year-long civil war in Syria, Idlib was where the displaced could find refuge. But Idlib city center is now under threat as the Syrian government forces captured Sarakib and just 7 kilometers away. Sinem Kasioglu, Al Jazeera, Bab el Hawa, northwestern Syria.
Israeli forces have shot another Palestinian dead in the occupied West Bank, the 5th in 48 hours. A funeral procession has been held for one of the victims, a Palestinian policeman who was killed in Jenin on Thursday. Tarek Badwan was in uniform at his station when he was shot during raids by Israeli forces. They were seizing CCTV footage related to a car ramming. Tensions are running high at the moment after US President Donald Trump unveiled his long-awaited Middle East initiative. You're at the NewsHour live from London. More still ahead. India's Prime Minister aims to quell fears over his controversial new citizenship law as he travels to one of the regions most affected by it. The British woman and former ISIL member facing an uncertain future after a decision by a UK court. And the man known as the Greek Freak is unstoppable again in the NBA. Peter will have that action later. Drug addiction in Afghanistan is a serious problem, with the number of users rising sharply in the years following the US invasion. The Taliban has been providing rehab services for drug addicts, but as many have come to learn, help from the Taliban comes at a cost. Zain Basravi reports now from Kabul.
Herat City, western Afghanistan. These men just a few of the millions of addicts in the country today. The latest UN figures suggest women and children are as much at risk of ending up like this, addicted to opium, heroin, morphine, crystal meth. Even when they're high, these men know where it can lead.
Every night, one or two are dying here. They are very young and they do not have any family. They were once very useful citizens and were not like this before. But now their life is in a severe condition and I worry about them. If someone will not take care of them, they will also die.
This is what a lost generation of Afghans looks like. A splinter group of the Taliban says it has a moral duty to do something. In Herat's mountain caves, they've been running a drug rehabilitation center for 4 years. Addicts go through what passes for detox here, several months of cold showers and long walks. In freezing weather, a Taliban commander offers Islamic teachings for inspiration and painkillers for withdrawal. Once they're clean, half of the addicts go home, others stay for training, weapons, and to join the Taliban.
This is Abdul Basir, who helps us with our military operations. He can go 100 kilometers into enemy territory. He plants mines in enemy areas, even inside their rooms. He killed 15 to 20 people by planting mines. Former addicts do these things. People inside these centers are encouraged to become a man like him.
A new lease on life makes for loyal fighters.
I destroyed my life. My family became hopeless because of me, and I was left alone. The Taliban not only treated me, but also helped my family financially. They sent money to my family. I earned the commander's trust and I am valuable now. I want to stay in this jihad unit to the last day of my life.
In the 2 decades since the U.S. invasion of Afghanistan, the number of drug users inside the country, as well as neighboring countries, has seen a sharp increase, and addicts have become a common sight in city streets across this country.
Experts say addiction is a symptom of a problem that stretches beyond Afghanistan's borders. An open secret in the capital, Kabul, is that all sides of the conflict make money dealing drugs. Criminal gangs, armed groups, including the Taliban, as well as the governments and militaries of neighboring countries.
The whole chain of drug traffickers, they are linked to the terrorist networks in the region, and they are exploiting this situation. They are exploiting the instability of Afghanistan for their business, illegal business.
Harun Rashid Sherzad worked for the Ministry of Counter-Narcotics. He says despite cases of corruption at the highest levels of government, the label narco-state is not Afghanistan's alone to bear.
Our farmers are not receiving a lot of money from the poppy cultivation. So what about the rest of the money? If you calculate the money laundering of opium economy and opium revenue, it increases to more than $400 billion. So where this money is, it's not in Afghanistan. Is it in Pakistan? Is it in Iran? Is it in Central Asia? Is it in Europe?
It's a complex issue that has, for years, taken a backseat to the country's more immediate security concerns and more recent efforts to end the war. But how those in power now deal with Afghanistan's drug problem, analysts agree will dramatically influence the future of the Afghan people. Zain Basravi, Al Jazeera, Kabul.
India's Prime Minister says his government will continue to push for peace in the country's northeast. Narendra Modi has been addressing crowds in the state of Assam. It's his first trip to the area since his government passed a controversial citizenship law which has sparked widespread protests. People in Assam, which shares a border with Bangladesh, say the measure would open the region to a flood of foreign migrants. But Modi tried to allay their fears.
There are forces which are using their full energy and spreading rumours in Assam and the northeast region. They say that with the Citizenship Amendment Act, people from outside the country will come and settle in the state. I assure the people of Assam that nothing of this sort will happen.
Well, Modi also spoke about a peace accord signed with rebels calling for greater autonomy for the Bodoland area. There's scepticism about his motivations for that agreement, as Elizabeth Puranam explains.
He spoke for a long time, and he was there in a place called Bodoland in an autonomous territory of Assam after signing a peace accord with the tribal group, the Bodos. Now, critics have said that this was a hastily signed accord because the government needs the political support of the Bodos as it faces opposition elsewhere in Assam over the citizenship law. And whereas protests around the country elsewhere in India have been by people who say that the law discriminates against Muslims, the protests in the northeastern states like Assam are for a different reason. The northeastern states have the largest number of migrants from Bangladesh. They share a border, and people there who are an ethnic minority in India feel that they'll become a minority in their own states. So the Prime Minister was celebrating this peace accord signed with the Bodos, and the only thing that he said very briefly about the citizenship law was that the people of Assam need not worry. It's not going to lead to an influx of what he called outsiders, but he's talking to people, the Bodo people who aren't affected by the law. The territories that they live in, the tribal territories, are protected, and he is not planning on going to any of the parts of Assam that have seen protests.
Pakistan's parliament has passed a resolution calling for the public hanging of convicted child killers and rapists. The measure follows a spate of high-profile child sex abuse cases. Human rights groups have been quick to condemn the non-binding law, but as Kamal Haider explains, it has a great deal of support inside the country.
Pakistan's parliament has approved a bill which will carry the death penalty for child rapists, and those executions will be carried out publicly. There has been a strong demand from people across Pakistan that there should be exemplary punishments for such heinous crimes. There has been a rising number of cases in this country. Last year alone, there were 4,000 cases that were reported, and that means almost 11 children per day. The Pakistani parliament supporting that bill with a majority vote because of the growing demand from the people here that there should be very strong sentences against such crimes in order to curtail this. However, Amnesty International may be critical, but people across Pakistan say that this is the only way forward.
A 20-year-old British woman who joined ISIL has lost the first stage of her appeal against the UK government's decision to strip her of her citizenship. Shamima Begum left London in 2015 along with 2 other schoolgirls to join ISIL. She resurfaced at a Syrian refugee camp a year ago where she told reporters she wanted to return to Britain. Emma Haywood has more on the case and what the next move could be.
It's 5 years ago this month since Shamima Begum, along with 2 of her friends, disappeared from East London. Police appealed for their safe return, but the girls had travelled from London into Turkey and then into Raqqa in northern Syria, where they lived under ISIL rule. Now, nothing was heard of Shamima Begum until she was spotted inside a refugee camp early last year. Now, within weeks, the then Home Secretary, Sajid Javid, had revoked her citizenship. Now, her lawyers argue that that was unlawful because it rendered her stateless. But a decision today by a special tribunal set up to look into the Shamima Begum case said that was simply not true because she is a citizen of Bangladesh by descent through her mother. Well, Shamima Begum's lawyers have said they will appeal against this decision. And this is really just the first stage of the process. It could even end up in the Supreme Court, the UK's highest court. And this case really does shine a light on the difficulties governments now are facing in dealing with those individuals who left the country to travel to Syria to support ISIL, who now want to return.
Tasneem Akunji is Shamima Begum's family's lawyer. He says her safety is at risk in Syria.
Right, so this is a preliminary judgment, the first phase of these sort of hearings in the SIAC courts, and they tend to go backwards and forwards over various issues and get fleshed out over time. So that is also being appealed in terms of whether she is or isn't a citizen of Bangladesh. Evidence has been heard here, and it will be fleshed out more so. We are saying that this decision is not doesn't engage the law properly, and so in our interpretation, we think there's ample grounds to appeal this, and it will be appealed. Well, I think anyone who argues that somebody in that part of the world at the moment isn't in danger, it has really not been watching the news, really. In terms of her conditions and our lodge camp, the difficulty we have is that her family certainly have had no contact with her since before February 2019. In terms of contact with lawyers, that's been extremely intermittent through third parties, and so the conditions we don't know, that may well be the subject of evidence in the substantive hearing about what those conditions actually are.
More still ahead for you on the programme. The surprise front-runner in the battle to take on Donald Trump for the US presidency aims to clear another hurdle towards the White House. The Brazilians forced to beg for food after major cutbacks in the nation's flagship welfare scheme. And a big upset for Naomi Osaka in Japan's Fed Cup tie with Spain. We'll have more on that later.
Well, it's taken most of the winter, but finally it's got properly cold. See where this cloud is going south? It's drawing in an Arctic wind at long last. It's recognisable by the temperatures. Moscow's now down to -7, Kiev's at 0, and Ankar's down to -2. Now, admittedly, most of the rest of Europe is at least a degree or so warmer than it should be, and that's double figures for London and Paris. Madrid's at 12, you'll notice. That's not particularly warm, admittedly. As for the weather associated with those low temperatures, snow now almost certainly confined to Turkey. Everywhere else is dry, but there is wind and rain, and increasingly strong wind, storm force across the British Isles later on in the weekend. It will spread across to Norway, where it'll bring snow, and also the Low Countries, where it'll just be a very windy, potentially damagingly windy day. Warnings are out already. So that is Europe. Now, there is an effect in the northeast of Africa. For Libya and Egypt, the wind will be up, but it will get colder too. Obviously, for the Levant, including Turkey, we've got rain or snow. But temperatures are at a high, only 16 in Cairo, only 16 in Al Jalf and Aswan. So most of Egypt, a good part of Libya, is considerably colder than you might expect. Desert nations and full-time sun.
Welcome back. A look at the headlines this hour now. Chinese Dr. Li Wenliang, who was threatened by police for raising the alarm about the coronavirus, has died. It's triggered a wave of grief, anger and demands for freedom of expression in China. Turkish armoured vehicles and tanks have entered rebel-controlled northwestern Syria in response to an advance by Syrian government forces. And Israeli soldiers have shot another Palestinian dead in the occupied West Bank, the fifth in 48 hours. A funeral procession has been held for one of the victims, a Palestinian policeman who was killed on Thursday. So more on the coronavirus outbreak now that has obviously caused alarm right around the globe. Foreign ministers from the African Union have been meeting for a second day to discuss their response. Hundreds of suspected infections have been reported amid concerns Africa is particularly vulnerable to the spread of the virus. And as Mohammed Val reports from the Ethiopian capital Addis Ababa, there are also worries over people trapped in China.
Adanash Esefa is a mother in distress. Her 21-year-old son Kebron Ebera is stuck in the Chinese city of Wuhan, along with 200 other Ethiopian students there. They've been confined to their halls of residence under quarantine for weeks. The emergency measure is aimed at preventing further infections of the coronavirus.
I'm very worried about his situation right now. It's not only the disease, but also access to food is very difficult. They're sharing a bottle of water for two. They're in a very difficult situation.
She's having a hard time communicating with her son. When he did get in contact, he sounded tired and dejected.
Yeah, we need help. We need to go back home.
The families of the stranded students are appealing to the Ethiopian government to repatriate them as soon as possible. The Ethiopian government hasn't banned flights from China, but has stepped up prevention measures at airports and medical centers. Up to 50,000 Chinese live and work in Ethiopia, and Ethiopian Airlines operates daily and weekly flights to 5 destinations in China.
We found 14 suspected cases of coronavirus based on the criteria of the WHO. 8 of them were found negative. We're still waiting for test results regarding the other 6, including 1 Chinese national, to arrive.
Similar measures are being taken in other African countries.
So we've set up what we call the Africa Task Force for Coronavirus Preparedness and Response, which brings all member states together, and we coordinate that closely with the World Health Organization in several areas of work, in the areas of laboratory testing, in the areas of enhanced airport surveillance and control, in the areas of infection control, and in the areas of care and treatment for potential cases there.
With the continent considered vulnerable to the spread of the epidemic, doctors are racing to raise the levels of readiness to cope. Mohammed Val, Al Jazeera, Addis Ababa.
Well, mass gatherings, including several sporting events, have already been cancelled in China, and even next month's National People's Congress is reportedly at risk. There's been no such ban in South Korea, where 6,000 couples from all over the world have just come together for a mass wedding organised by the Unification Church. 24 coronavirus cases have been reported in that country, and the building in the city of Gapyeong was sterilised before the ceremony. Now, a key witness in US President Donald Trump's impeachment trial has been fired from his White House job. Lieutenant Colonel Alexander Vindman, whose testimony in the inquiry infuriated President Trump and his allies, has just been escorted out of the White House. Let's go live now to Rosalind Jordan, who's in Washington for us. What do we know about Alexander Vindman's, eviction?
Well, we have a statement from his lawyer, David Pressman, and I'm going to quote from part of this rather lengthy statement. Quote, "There is no question in the mind of any American why this man's job is over, why this country now has one less soldier serving it at the White House. Lieutenant Colonel Vindman was asked to leave for telling the truth. His honor, his commitment to right, frightened the powerful." And as you might expect, Mariam, the reaction is coming in quite quickly from people who are very concerned about his future after he testified back in November about the July 25th phone call between President Donald Trump and the president of Ukraine, Mr. Zelensky, a call which Mr. Vindman told members of Congress at the time that he thought was improper, was veering into inappropriate and perhaps illegal areas, and that the handling of the transcript of that phone call was placed under extremely tight classification, something that should not have been done if in fact this were simply a getting to know you better phone call. We've heard from Hillary Clinton, the former Secretary of State and 2016 Democratic presidential candidate, who said, quote, in her tweet, "During his testimony about Trump's crimes, Lieutenant Colonel Vindman had a message for his father. You made the right decision 40 years ago, to leave the Soviet Union. Do not worry. I will be fine for telling the truth." And this is Clinton following up on this quote. "It's appalling that this administration may prove him wrong."
Thank you very much from Washington, Rosalind Jordan. Thanks, Rosalind. Well, in other developments, the race to take on Donald Trump in November's presidential election is reaching another key stage. 7 candidates from the opposition Democrats are taking part in a debate ahead of the New Hampshire primary. It comes after technical glitches marred the start of the selection process in Iowa earlier this week. Buttigieg is the early front-runner after scoring a narrow victory in that Iowa caucus. Former mayor of South Bend, Indiana, is a centrist and also the only openly gay candidate. He was 0.1%, only 0.1% ahead of veteran Senator Bernie Sanders. The 78-year-old has strong grassroots support from the left and famously lost out to Hillary Clinton in the nomination in 2016. Elizabeth Warren took third place. She's also from the left of the party and has called for more funding from her supporters. Joe Biden had a disappointing week with fourth place in Iowa. Barack Obama's former vice president was seen by many senior Democrats as the person who could beat Donald Trump. Three more candidates have qualified for the debate: Minnesota Senator Amy Klobuchar, lawyer and businessman Andrew Yang, and philanthropist and environmentalist Tom Steyer. But there is one more potential leading candidate who is not there. Former New York Mayor Michael Bloomberg started his campaign late and is focusing on the so-called Super Tuesday states next month. Well, Richard Goodstein is a Democratic strategist and former advisor to Bill and Hillary Clinton, joins us now from Washington. So obviously I don't need to tell you that the Iowa caucus has turned out to be a bit of a fiasco for the Democrats. How critical is New Hampshire going to be?
Well, let me just put Iowa in some perspective. In 2012, Rick Santorum, who was running for the Republican presidential nomination, was told that he won the Iowa caucuses 16 days after the caucuses ended. So this is not like a problem unique to Democrats.
No, but I guess in the context of everything else that's going on, it seemed, Trump's acquittal in the impeachment trial, we don't want to get into that, but it's something they could have done without.
Obviously. So New Hampshire is obviously vital to each of the people, the four top ones that you named. Kind of take them in reverse order. Yes, Joe Biden needs to show that he really can compete in states that aren't reliant on minority voters. South Carolina has a high percentage of black voters, for example. Iowa didn't. New Hampshire most definitely does not. Again, a matter of perspective, in 1988, George H.W. Bush, the older President Bush, finished third. He was the incumbent vice president. He finished third in the Iowa caucuses, and of course he went on to not just get the nomination, but win the presidency. So people are kind of writing off Biden, I think, a little too soon. Warren is from the neighboring state of New Hampshire, Massachusetts. But again, she and Bernie Sanders are competing in what's called the same lane, the kind of the liberal lane, and I think if she falls behind him again, that's going to be a problem for her in terms of fundraising or just political kind of vitality. Pete Buttigieg is the one I think that frankly is going to benefit most by having done as well as he did in Iowa. I don't think the people in New Hampshire frankly sat up and took notice of him, but they are now, and the national polls show him coming on, the New Hampshire polls show him coming on, and I think he's going to give Sanders a real run for his money. And Sanders in 2016, as you mentioned, he ran against Hillary Clinton. He got 60% of the vote in New Hampshire against Hillary in 2016. It looks now in the polls, he may get half of that. So I have a hunch the big story coming out of New Hampshire, unless Biden surprises people, is going to be what Mayor Buttigieg comes out with.
Right. So after Iowa, you've got Bernie Sanders and Pete Buttigieg really doing very well. They are the top targets. But from what you're saying, it's really Biden, Elizabeth Warren, and Klobuchar, Amy Klobuchar, that need to put in perhaps a more aggressive performance and demonstrate some strength.
Correct. And I think, frankly, both Biden, Klobuchar, and maybe even Buttigieg have a challenge. Do they take on Bernie Sanders and say, Senator, you're running for the Democratic nomination for president. You are not a Democrat. You are a unreconstructed socialist. You believe in nationalizing banks and telecommunications, and the list goes on. We don't. We live in a capitalist society. We actually are fearful that you at the top of our ticket will be not just beaten by Donald Trump, but hurt our senatorial and congressional candidates. And they haven't done that yet. And I think that's the question tonight that I'm going to be watching for is, will one of them step up and finally, Hillary Clinton never did this, take on Bernie Sanders directly? And I think the fear for them is, do I alienate his supporters?
Right. And just briefly, a good debate performance doesn't necessarily mean that doesn't necessarily translate to a win in the primary itself.
Worse. I mean, yes, it's true what you just said. And the calculus is with a 5-person or more field, you might take somebody else down, but somebody else might benefit by kind of the gap that you've left. So that's the calculus that each of these candidates has to make if they choose to kind of go negative against Sanders or anybody else, that they might in fact hurt themselves a little bit in the course of hurting somebody else maybe a bit more. There's a third candidate who might benefit. So it's like 5-level chess. It's complicated.
Yeah, it's complicated, but nonetheless, thank you for explaining something of the dynamics to us. Appreciate it. Richard Goodstein, their Democratic strategist, joining us from Washington.
Thank you for having me.
Now, Malawi's Electoral Commission is seeking to suspend the annulment of last year's presidential election. The electoral body filed an appeal on Friday saying that judges were mistaken in almost all of their findings when they discarded the result of last year's poll. Earlier this week, the court cited voting irregularities and overturned the re-election of President Peter Mutharika. Haramutasa has more now from the capital, Lilongwe.
Malawi's Electoral Commission wants the Supreme Court to overturn a ruling made by the Constitutional Court to annul last year's election, and they've cited a number of reasons. They say, first of all, a prominent banker has been accused of allegedly trying to bribe some of the judges. They also say that the Constitutional Court cannot tell Parliament to make sure that in the next election the winner must get more than 50% of the vote. They say that's a case of the judiciary trying to interfere with the legislature, an issue of separation of powers. President Peter Mutharika is also going to appeal. He says the judgment made by the Constitutional Court is a miscarriage of justice. There are fears that all these appeals in the court could delay the election, and there are fears there could be violence if that happens. Opposition parties and human rights activists say they're planning protests if the elections are delayed. They also want the head of the Electoral Commission, Jane Ansah, to resign or to be removed, and they said they've given her until Friday next week to step down, or there will be nationwide demonstrations.
Now, Ireland is gearing up for an election that could shake up the status quo, potentially. Healthcare is one of the major concerns in Saturday's vote, with more than 500,000 patients waiting to see a doctor. As Paul Brennan reports from the southern city of Limerick, the issue could greatly influence the outcome of the election.
Around Cork City, political posters gaze down from the lampposts. But it's Ireland's healthcare crisis which the voters want the politicians to look at.
I know one instance of a woman that had to bring in pillows for her mother because they hadn't got pillows. So no, that's a joke as well, like.
If you have private insurance, it's fine. There's no problem. But for the ordinary man on the street, it's not good to see people waiting on trolleys for hours and hours.
Dr. Sarah Fitzgibbon has worked in a deprived area of North Cork for the past 15 years. Her dedication is self-evident, and so are her frustrations.
So a child presenting today with mental health issues that I feel require specialist intervention, if I put them on a waiting list, they might be seen in 4 years' time, which is just, that's not a service.
In 2014, nearly 359,000 outpatients were on the public waiting list to see a consultant. By 2017, the number had risen above 500,000 for the first time. And in 2019, it had grown to more than 553,000.
To try to tackle those relentless increases in the waiting list, the Irish government is throwing millions every year of public money into buying private healthcare. In 2019, it was the equivalent of $82 million, and this year it's going to be closer to $110 million. And still the waiting lists go up.
Having private health insurance meant that when John Wall was diagnosed with terminal prostate cancer in 2017, prompt treatment helped extend his life. In the time he has left, he's advocating urgent reform.
Frontline staff do their absolute to do whatever they can, given the resources that they have. But that's the problem. They don't have enough resources. They don't have enough beds. They don't have enough staff. And the resources that are being allocated is basically throwing good money after bad.
A universal health proposal called Sláinte Care has been suggested, but the different political parties have very different ideas of what to prioritise and how to implement it.
So really what's important here is that the population that are going to vote on Saturday are really looking for change, and it's a change in culture to actually be citizen-centred and to put the politics aside to ensure that everybody can have safe, timely access to healthcare.
It was the threat of a no-confidence vote in Health Minister Simon Harris which forced the Irish Taoiseach Leo Varadkar to call this election, faced with a combination of public anger and the sense that no one was accepting responsibility. On Saturday, in the polling booths, the voters will hold the politicians to account. Paul Brennan, Al Jazeera, Limerick.
Out of Brazil, many of the country's poorest families are struggling to afford basic goods as the government has been slowing down the flagship anti-poverty program. They've drastically cut the number of beneficiaries of the so-called Bolsa Familia, or family bag. It's led to a huge waiting list, as John Holman reports from Rio de Janeiro.
At the end of a dirt road outside of Rio de Janeiro, Paula Souza is engaging in a weary, daily struggle.
Today we had nothing to eat. I had to go out and ask a woman to help us. We had no food. Yesterday I cooked some pasta and my husband asked some fishermen nearby to give him something from their catch.
Until 3 months ago, they received cash from the government. The program's called Bolsa Familia, the family bag. It was only about $40 a month, but it helped keep them afloat. Now for them, and about 1 million other Brazilians, that benefit's been stopped. The number of families newly admitted to the programme has also plummeted to a fraction of those accepted before. It's meant a ballooning waiting list of 500,000 people. Salette, 58 and unemployed, is among them. She says she's been given the runaround since she tried to join up last August.
The authorities don't care. They push me from one place to another like a ping pong ball.
Bolsa Familia has helped millions of Brazilians. It's the government's flagship anti-poverty programme, but it's been having problems for 5 years now, and this is just the latest setback. It started when the leftist then government stopped adjusting payouts to keep up with inflation. Now, the current administration has again hit what was a successful and cheap anti-poverty tool.
They are very important, and at the same time, reaches about 1/4 of the Brazilian population. The very, very poor is very well targeted. The money goes to women, goes to children with conditionalities, and costs very little. So it costs only 0.4% of a GDP. So you basically, Brazil did a sort of fiscal adjustment on the poor.
For its recipients, not just present survival, but futures are now on hold.
My children have big dreams. The eldest wants to join the army. He was training and trying out for a football club, but we had to withdraw him. We couldn't afford his transport.
The government says it's just reorganising to improve the programme. Millions are waiting. John Holman, Al Jazeera, Rio de Janeiro.
Scientists have warned that bumblebees across Europe and North America are facing a mass extinction. Studies suggest the drastic decline is because of climate change and threatens food cultivation. It says Europe's bumblebee population fell by 17% between the 20th and 21st century, and by 46% in North America. Bumblebees play a key role in pollinating crops, including nuts, fruits and vegetables. Still ahead. Ireland looked to their captain for inspiration in rugby's Six Nations. Pete will have more on their clash with Wales. Time now for all the sport with Pete in Doha.
Mariam, thank you very much. Former Pakistan cricketer Nasir Jamshed has been sentenced to 17 months in prison by a UK court for his part in a spot-fixing scandal. The 30-year-old admitted, along with 2 other defendants, to conspiring to bribe fellow players in a T20 match in Dubai in February 2017. Batsmen were asked to avoid scoring runs from certain balls in return for money. Jamshed has already been banned from cricket for 10 years by the Pakistan Cricket Board. It was a good day on the field for Pakistan's current cricket team on the opening day of the one-off test in Rawalpindi. Bangladesh were bowled out for 233. Shaheen Afridi with a 5-wicket haul for the hosts. Mohammad Mitoon was the only man to go past a half-century for the tourists. He contributed a knock of 63. Barcelona's coach Quique Setién insists they are heading in the right direction, despite a shock exit in the Spanish Cup and a cloud over the future of star player Lionel Messi. The build-up to Thursday's defeat at Athletic Bilbao was preceded by a public spat between Messi and Barca's sporting director Eric Abidal. Messi's contract does allow him to leave at the end of this season for free, but one of his former coaches, Pep Guardiola, does not think he will move away from the Nou Camp.
He's a player from Barcelona, he will stay there. That is my wish. Stay in Barcelona, so I'm not going to talk about the players for the other club.
But as someone knows him well, I'm not going to ask you about signing him. I'm going to ask you whether you think he might play for another European side ever, or whether that's just Barcelona.
I think he's going to finish his career there.
Israel Folau's controversial return to rugby league has been delayed. He has been left out of the Catalan Dragon squad for Sunday's season opening match at Wakefield. The French club did not say why, but Folau's fitness was in question. It has been 8 months since he was sacked by Australia's rugby union for posting homophobic comments on social media. Defending Six Nations champions Wales face a stern test of their title credentials in the second round of matches. The Grand Slam winners take on Ireland in Dublin on Saturday.
Coming out here it's a great place to come and play rugby in a tournament game in particular. We know we've had a mixed bag over recent years. A few friendlies, warm-ups, whatever we even want to call them. But coming out here, there's no truer test. On the international stage. So, hopefully we'll be on the front foot tomorrow.
As for Ireland, well, they laboured to victory against Scotland in their opening match of the championship last weekend. The team are hoping to give their fans a more inspiring performance this time round at the Aviva Stadium.
We've got to have big moments in the game that get the crowd up for it and get them behind us. So, I think the way the game started last week, Scotland are probably on the ascendancy from the first sort of 5-6 minutes. So hopefully we can flip that around this week and get the atmosphere going.
Scotland welcome their old rivals England to Murrayfield in Edinburgh on Saturday in their first home game of the tournament. They are looking to retain the Calcutta Cup for a third season in a row.
We can't stand back and admire England for too long. They've got some cracking individual players. They're a quality side. They're not in a World Cup final for nothing. They're a world-class team, and it's going to take us to be at our best for the full 80 minutes to come away with the result we want.
As for England, well, they are still smarting from their opening day defeat to France in Paris, and the team are ready for the reception they'll receive from the Scottish crowd.
Getting booed off the bus and stuff, and seeing the reaction of the Scottish players when they'd won, and seeing the crowd and how much it means to everyone up here, it's definitely something to acknowledge, and it's definitely there. You can't really ignore it, especially when it's as loud as Murrayfield is.
One of tennis's greatest rivalries produced a record-breaking occasion in South Africa on Friday. Roger Federer and Rafael Nadal took part in a one-off charity event in Cape Town, watched by 50,000 fans. Federer won in 3 sets. Elsewhere in the Fed Cup, there was an embarrassing defeat for Naomi Osaka on Friday. The former world number 1 lost to world number 78, Sara Sorribes Tormo, in Japan's qualifying tie with Spain. Osaka losing 6-love, 6-3. Spain lead the tie 2-0 after the opening day's singles. The Milwaukee Bucks' almost total dominance of the NBA so far this season continued, with Giannis Antetokounmpo putting in another superhuman display. The man known as the Greek Freak was a thorn in the side of the Philadelphia 76ers, bamboozling his fellow All-Star Joel Embiid here. Antetokounmpo was last season's most valuable player and looks well on the way to claiming that title again, drawing in Embiid to set up Pat Connaughton.
Assist by the playmaking Antetokounmpo. Sixer team that closed to within.
Giannis would like a league title too, and his 36 points mean Milwaukee stay top in the East.
Wow!
112-101 the score here against Philly. 4 road losses on the bounce for them.
Go to 44.
The Los Angeles Lakers are still top of the West, but have been far more inconsistent. LeBron James and co losing to the Houston Rockets on Thursday. Russell Westbrook passing 20,000 career points for Houston, who climbed to fourth. And Greg Popovich has seen plenty of ups and downs in his 24 years as coach of the San Antonio Spurs. A bit of a down on this occasion. CJ McCollum running the plays with Damian Lillard to give Portland victory. Both teams just outside the playoff picture. We'll leave it there for now. More sports coming up again later. I'll hand you back to Mariam in London.
Thank you very much. Well, that wraps up the News Hour, but I'll be back in a moment with much more of the day's news for you. A full bulletin coming up very shortly. See you in a bit. Bye for now.